Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So in the last episode, we went ahead and knocked out all of the foundational work for Dan's car. Well, I guess everything aside from the throttle body, which I knocked out in the intro montage. So we have the compressor outlets all squared away. We have the intercooler all squared away. Shuffling around the radiator and everything. Everything is in the position that it needs to be for me to actually build these intercooler tubes. So I'm going to start with the cold side tube, as it's the quickest and easiest of them. And although I typically start with the more difficult of the tasks for jobs like this, I really want to see what this looks like with this tube wrapped up. So that's where we're going to start. So I have right here, this is a tight radius 4-inch bend. I have this microfiber right here just to space it off of the radiator a little bit. So that way we still have some movement up and down with this guy right here. And now we just have to make the tube section that goes from this flange or ferrule right here back to this tube. So should be fairly easy and straightforward, at least I'm hoping that it is. And I have right here 2 4-inch 90-degree bends, so that way if I completely screw one of these cuts up, I have a backup that I can use to recraft it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this upper cold side tube knocked out, and then from there we can shift focus to the actual hot side tubes and connecting the turbos to the lower inlets on this intercooler. Just like that, Dan's cold side intercooler tube is all welded, aside from the accessories that we're going to put onto it, but the main body of this tube is completed, and now I'm going to move on to the 2 sections coming out of the compressor outlets. So I'll have to play around with the angles a little bit, but what I'm going to do initially is cut this 3.5-inch 90 in half, so I have 2 45s, and we'll see how that works out fitting around these chassis bars. I don't know exactly if a 45s are going to be the right angles for them, but it's at least worth a shot, and if nothing else, I'll have pre-cut 45s that I can use for something else or some other portion of these intercooler tubes. So let's go ahead, make that cut, and hope that the 45s fit and that we are off to a good start with these intercooler tubes. I just had to do a fair amount of grinding on Dan's car to get clearance for the intercooler tube on this side. So at this point, now that both of the 3-inch sections are squared away for the inlets on the lower half of this intercooler, I can now figure out the locations of my cones, which these go from 3.5 on the large side here to 3-inch on the small side. And these will live somewhere down in this area. I'll have to make two little kind of short angle cuts off of a couple of other 3-inch bends that I have, just to provide this little bit of kick that I'm looking for to run the cone up towards where this 3.5-inch section is here. So in doing so, I'll be able to keep these tubes that much farther away from the tires. I've already gone ahead and blocked the front end, meaning loosened the front suspension, and put my big log of justice right here underneath of both of the front tires. And I will have clearance for this, but I'm just going to sculpt both of these tubes in a manner such that it provides as much clearance as possible. So I'll go ahead and make those 2 cuts on 3-inch tubes, get everything squared away there, get the cones located, and then we can build either upwards or downwards from there. Well, Dan's intercooler tubes, the hot side tubes that is, are now all fabricated and all tacked together aside from 2 joints. So here is what we're sitting with right now. So the speed tape on both of these joints here, those are the tacks that have yet to be done, but I want to get the lower sections all welded together first prior to marking those and tacking those joints. But pretty happy with how everything has came together. Everything looks at least reasonably symmetrical, even though it isn't quite symmetrical from side to side. Through the wheel wells, you can see that everything is tucked up in there as tight as it can be to provide ample tire clearance. This is on the passenger side. And then if we go over to the driver's side, we have the same situation over here. So I'm very happy with how these have came together, and I sent photos over to Dan so he can verify that he is happy with it, as ultimately that is the most important part of a project like this that you're doing for somebody else. But if we climb up the ladder a little bit so we can get a better perspective and vantage point on it, if I zoom you guys in a little bit, you can see it looks pretty nice, pretty cool, and I am pretty happy with it. So once I get the go-ahead from Dan, I will either weld these together, or if I get a negative response from him, well, then I have some reworking to do and reconfiguring and everything else. But we'll see what he says, go from there, and continue to get this thing knocked out. Well, I heard back from Dan, and he is happy with what we have going on here. So that is the go-ahead that I needed to start the welding process. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to do it in, I guess, 4 total portions. So I'm going to weld the bottom section of this one, or of either side. But I'll weld a bottom section, come back out and make sure that everything still fits together. And if it does, we can mark out the passenger side, driver side, and then do those 2 final welds. The reason that I'm doing it this way is if there's any movement that's going to happen, it'll be down in these busier sections, and that will still allow me, or it will provide the opportunity to tailor these joints right here if need be after the lower sections are welded. So that's the way that I like to do it. I'm sure there's multiple other ways that are just as effective, but this is what I found that works for me, and that's what we're going to do here. So let's go ahead, pull this back apart, get to welding, and before long we will have 2 completed hot side intercooler tubes. Well, another welding session in the books, and as you guys just saw by my little happy dance, everything fits, everything is good to go, and we are down to the last portions of this project. So I've checked the tire clearance, everything is good to go there, everything still fits back together, everything looks cool, and most importantly, Dan is happy with it. So the next portion of this video that you guys will see is actually installing all of the little accoutrement, or the features that I like to call them, that will be going on the cold side tube. So that is these injector bungs, that is the blow-off valve flanges, and that is an IAT bung. So we have doubles of everything minus the IAT bung. And we'll have to figure out the best locations on this tube that Dan likes, that will function the best, and so on and so forth. But I'm going to get out of here for right now. It's been a long day fabricating these hot side tubes, and we will reconvene and continue pressing on very shortly on this car. It is feature installation day on Dan's Nova project, and we have a number of different components that I need to install into these intercooler tubes. So we have a 3/8 NPT bung for the IAT sensor. We have 2 of these auxiliary injector bungs, which these are pretty cool, and we'll go over in more detail in a little bit in terms of their location and their function and all of that. We have 2 1/8 NPT bungs that will go up on the compressor covers. Those will be reference bungs for the wastegate lines. And then rounding it out, we have 2 of these JGS blow-off valves that I need to place on the intercooler tubes as well. So I've talked to Dan, talked to Bob, talked to everybody that is involved with this project, and figured out where exactly things are going to be located. So I'm going to start off with the most difficult and work my way back to the easiest. So we will start off with the blow-off valves, as getting these in a position that is easily accessible and somewhat symmetrical is going to be the largest challenge of all of this. Once those are knocked out, then we can move on to easier stuff. But without further ado, let's go ahead and start knocking out the blow-off valve locations, and we can move forward from there. Both of the blow-off valve flanges are now welded onto the intercooler tubes. The ports are cut, they're sanded, ported, everything else, and they came out very nicely. So you can see one of the flange welds there. You can see the other flange weld there, and you can see some of the porting and more of the porting. These are going to work very nicely, and I'm not sure if I showed or not during the fab process, but I will show later on during the showcase section of the video where the blow-off valves are located. I think it's a really cool location. Dan likes it, and that's what matters the most. So now what we need to do is figure out the locations for his 8th NPT reference bungs, which are going to be located on the compressor housings. So Dan's wastegates are down below. Let's see if I can zoom in. But I'm not sure how well you guys will be able to see, but down in that area, there's one of the wastegates. And you can see a little bit better right there. There's the driver's side wastegate. But in order to make a wastegate function, you need a boost reference to it, or some sort of a pressure reference. So I have these two 8th NPT bungs that are going to serve as the ports for those pressure references, and they're going to go somewhere on these cast elbows that I put on the compressor outlets, and I'll tuck them up in a spot where they won't get in the way of the tires, but B, so they can also have an easy path for the actual lines to run down to the wastegates or wherever he's going to run them to. So this will be pretty straightforward, pretty easy. All I have to do is mark out 2 locations, drill 2 holes, weld 2 bungs into place, and then do some final cleanup on the compressor covers, and they'll be all good to go and ready to be installed on the car for good at that point in time. We're down to the last few additions on Dan's intercooler tubing. And this car is looking pretty naked at this point in time as I work my way through these different components and pile them up on the ground over there. But we have the 2 auxiliary injector bungs and the IAT bung. The IAT bung is pretty self-explanatory. It's just a 3/8 NPT female weld bung. And like I said earlier, that will go on the bottom side of the cold side intercooler tube. But the injector bungs are not so self-explanatory. As I learned when I was talking with Bob, who tunes this car, he tunes the silver car, tunes a variety of different fast cars around here. You guys just saw in a recent video their white Fox body going bottom sevens, his black Camaro that I did a video on a while ago at the local No Prep Kings event. Needless to say, he's very well versed in performance cars, drag racing, making big power, and doing so scientifically. So I say all of that because this threw me for a loop when I was talking to him yesterday. So my initial thought was to put the injector facing this way. So that way the cope flows the fuel with the airstream going up to the throttle body. And I figured that was going to be the solution. Well, in talking to Bob, and I give him a lot of credit for being patient with me, what we're going to actually do is face them what seems like backwards. Now, the reason for this is if we flow fuel at the incoming air, it's supposed to atomize the fuel better. And the way Bob explained it to me is with what we're using these for, we're not actually aiming for the engine to consume the fuel that is coming out of these two injectors, but rather we are using the fuel to cool the air charge that's entering the engine. Now, I'm sure inevitably we're going to end up having some fuel make its way into the intake manifold down to the cylinders, so on and so forth. And that isn't a huge concern, but like I said, the main purpose of putting these on here is to make or to have the air charge entering the engine be as cool as it can be, therefore allowing the engine to operate more efficiently and to keep everything happier. A turbo obviously functions under the principle of compressing air, and when you compress air, you also heat it up. So having the ability or using these guys to add additional fuel to therefore cool that air charge will just make the engine happier. So hopefully that explanation makes sense, and now I need to figure out the locations for these. So I think what I'm going to do is place them pretty much above the radiator, something like this, and I'll run them pretty much parallel to this upper plate on the radiator. I think that'll look cool, that'll look clean. It keeps the fuel a little bit farther away from the IAT sensor, so that way there won't be any interference, or we will have limited interference between the injectors and the IAT. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and figure out these locations, punch a few more holes, do a few more welds, and then we'll be done with all the fab work on this car. And with that, another large welding and fabrication project is completed. Another really cool car, really cool turbo system to work with. I'm happy that this car came back, as like I said at the beginning of this series, this is a repeat car. Dan is a repeat customer, and I could not be happier or more thankful to have had and to continue to have the opportunity to work on this car. And you know, something that is pretty cool as well is not often do I get to work on a car that I'm also wearing the shirt of. So Dan was kind enough years ago to get these shirts made and to send one over, and I've been wearing it proudly and happily ever since. A once over of this, firstly we started with compressor housing modifications, intercooler modifications, throttle body modifications, all of the foundational modifications that are necessary or that were necessary to figure out my point A and point B for all of these components across the board. From there, I knocked out the cold side intercooler tube, followed very quickly after by the two hot side intercooler tubes, trying my best to keep them as symmetrical as I could. From there, I went ahead and welded everything up, and what you guys have seen now, adding all of the different features and accessories to all of these pieces. And at this point in time, I am out of materials over on my cart there. I'm out of work to do on this thing, and my portion of this project is a wrap. So we're not quite done with the car just yet. I know we did the outro video montage, all the B-roll shots and everything, but one exciting thing with this car is this will be one that we actually get to hear before it leaves the shop. I know most of the cars that come in, like Dawn's Supra, that car we didn't get to hear it on this channel, but Dan's car drove into the shop and it's going to drive out as well. So we'll get to hear some American Detroit iron V8 noises. That'll be pretty cool. We'll see if anything sounds any different with this new setup here. But again, I'm very happy to have worked on this car, very happy that the project is completed. And I can't wait to see Dan's reaction when he comes here, finally gets to see all of this in person. And I hope that he really likes it, because I really do.
sir.
And with that, Dan's car has left the building. He was very happy with the end product, which makes me very happy for the effort that was put into it. And anytime you are working on a project like that, where everybody can leave happy at the end of it, it's a beautiful thing. So it was a very cool project and feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work on it. And I can't wait to see Dan racing next year and to get out there with him with the old silver car and have some good track hangouts and both get to use these cars that we spent so much time, effort, and money on. But with all that being said, that'll be the end of this episode and the end of this build series. So let's go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all these different journeys and all of these different adventures with me. Dan's project was very cool, as were all of the projects that I've gotten to work on this year. It's been a really cool year, and I've been very fortunate to have been able to work on all of the neat vehicles that I have. But we need to get back to the Toyotas next, and I think that the SC will be back under the knife as we have a fuel system to build. Have some ideas for how I'd like to do it, and have some parts to order to be able to make it a reality. So we'll get back on this car next, get it squared away, and get it ready the rest of the way to go on the dyno and see what kind of power it makes and to get it wrapped up. So come springtime and warm weather, or hell, even in the middle of winter, if we get a nice day, I can take this car out and enjoy it and relive a very bright spot in my history and my youth, driving my first car around again all these years later. But we have that to look forward to, as well as many other cool projects and cool things throughout this winter off season, throughout build season here. That'll be in the future. Right now, we are done with this episode, so before I ramble on any more, that'll be the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, including my 15th anniversary hoodies. Time is ticking if you want to get either a hoodie, t-shirt, or maybe both for your collection. Those will expire and be no more at the beginning of 2025. So if you want one, go ahead and scoop one up. And if not, that's okay as well. Maybe I'll offer something in the future that does speak to you and that you would like to add to your collection. But with all of that being said, that will be the end of this one, and I will see you guys in the next episode.